let me say, first of all, that when I was a young student, Bonhoeffer was a hero of mine. But when I was young, his time seemed so far away. Today, I have a sense that his time and his circumstances are uncannily close to ours. I experienced a striking reminder of this only a few days ago when I was visiting Athens. I stayed at a tiny Airbnb that belongs to a friend. The previous owner of the house came by asking if she could see the house where her grandmother once lived and worked as a maid, where her grandmother would tell her stories about the attic, which was known as the secret room. That was the room where I was staying, which was used as a hideaway for Jews during World War II. I think that all candidates for the priesthood today should be familiar with Bonhoeffer's theology of discipleship and his ministry of sacrifice. His life reflects how the church should be present and accountable in the public domain. In the film that we're discussing this evening, Bonhoeffer says, "I've learned that people don't hear what is shouted from the pulpit as much as they hear what is whispered in the streets." His ministry reflects how the church should be outspoken and not withdraw from political challenges. Again, in the film, Bonhoeffer speaks of placing a stick in the very wheel of the fascist, immoral state until it stops. His integrity reflects how the church is called to be prophetic, how silence in the face of injustice only increases and aggravates evil. Again, in the film, Bonhoeffer says, "When they come to knock at my door, will there be anyone left to speak for me?" Your graces and dear friends, I want to welcome you to this Bonhoeffer evening. My name is Father John Chrysavgas. I'm the Executive Director of the Huffington Ecumenical Institute. And we are hosted this evening by this wonderful venue, the Meliodas Cultural Center. And the event is co-sponsored by the Massachusetts Council of Churches. We're going to hear, first of all, from the two producers of the film, a couple, Camille and Emmanuel Campouris, who I believe are on Zoom. Welcome, friends. Nice to see you. So the floor is yours. We'd like to hear a little bit about the film from your perspective. Can you tell us what is it that got you excited about creating such a film?
Well, I think in 2010, we read a biography written by Mr. Metaxas, Eric Metaxas, who popularized Bonhoeffer, because until then, he was not very well known, generally speaking, other than in the academy. So he popularized it, and we felt that it was a very good, it was very helpful. We decided at the time that we should try and make a movie out of it. And in order to do that, we said, well, to make a movie, you need a script. So we felt that we should commission a script for this movie. And that was in 2010. So you want to?
Yeah, and it was about 2012. And we were very naive. We thought this will take about a year or two out of our lives, and then we'll just hand it over to a filmmaker. And the script actually took 7 years to make. We had 3 screenwriters, 2 script doctors, 2 directors worked with us, consultants. And in that time, we had to put in a structure.
Yeah, we had to put a structure. We even had a director on board, and we had several people, consultants were helping us out.
And legal.
And legal, of course, very important. So that process took a life of its own, and we continued. And whereas we thought that would be an easy thing, probably a month or a year or so to develop a script. It took us 7 years.
Yeah,
To
and I
develop
mean,
a
it began to be clear that this was a call of God, that He was asking us to steward, to steward this project, because we just got more and more into it, and then more and more. We had never done a movie before. I had been in show business, and he had been a businessman, which is good because they don't call it show business for nothing. It's a lot of business. So we knew aspects of it, but yeah, there's a lot. You don't just commission a script, obviously. You have to deal with agents and managers and lawyers and directors. And so we became very busy very quickly.
Yeah. We got sort of essentially sucked in into this process.
You mentioned it was a calling from God. What do you expect viewers to take from the film? What would you like viewers to take from the film?
Well, I think what we'd like viewers to take is to essentially encourage them, and emulate what Bonhoeffer did. That he was a very, committed Christian, and who said he was all in for Christ, and that everything he did was to promote Christianity and all its principles. And he was not afraid. He had fear, he had no fear at all. And he was essentially all in.
His famous line is, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. So I think the first thing we wanted is to raise up men and women of any age that would be committed Christians like Bonhoeffer was. And then I think, and you might tell the story of Nachbartos, but I think the second thing is that it's a call for the church to go back to God, because in one respect, the movie indicts the church for its failure, its moral failure and spiritual failure. And on the other hand, it shows what a Christian should be. But you went into
we were, a couple of years ago, we were in Nachbartos, the monastery there. We go there once a year, and the abbot. And we showed the movie to the abbot, and I explained it to him a little bit. And after 1 hour into the movie, he turns around to me. He says, "Well, this is like a modern day letter to the church, like Revelation 2, which is quite impressive." And it was very prophetic that he felt that this movie is like a letter to the church today. So I think that was.
But, if you're not a Christian, because the movie's for everybody, and if you're not a Christian, we hope that it will start people on that journey of looking into a transcendent life, or a life of faith. It's opening in England next Friday, and the distributor over there loves it, because she says it is obviously for the church, but she felt that for non-Christians, the comment she's been getting is that it's such a great introduction of faith. It doesn't hit you over the head like some faith-based movies do, but she felt it was just great for the secular world, which she's hearing. And I don't know if you have noticed, but some of our best reviews have been from the secular world, like Variety, for instance. So
thank you, and thank you for adding that broader dimension as well, which I think is very important. So, a letter to the church. Let me put you on the spot a little bit before you leave us. There were letters from various people over the past year that were critical of the film. The Bonhoeffer Society, the Bonhoeffer family, the Bonhoeffer scholars, even the Bonhoeffer actors, denouncing the film for promoting Christian nationalism, as they said. Now, I believe that this sort of criticism may be valid for the biography that Eric Metaxas wrote. I admit I did not see it in the film, but I know it has concerned you as well, so I'm wondering what you make of this, how you would respond to these criticisms.
Well, actually, started it was the marketing. Angel Studios felt that they tested everything, how to market it. And the fact that we use the word assassin as a title, it's not the title of the movie, but it was a subtitle, if you will. And also, in the poster, they put up, he had a gun in his hand, which is a metaphor for that he stood up, for the church.
They weaponized
And
it.
weaponized, exactly. So I think that is it's the marketing that caused the stir, because we had, as you say, of course, when you talk about the Bonhoeffer family, there's so much of a family. These is great nieces or nephews that are involved today, and the Bonhoeffer Society seemed to, they really very much inward looking and talking to themselves, and even the actors, but they had not seen the movie. Once we showed them the movie, when they saw the movie, they changed their minds, as a matter of fact. And when they came to our premiere here in New York, the whole team came over, and they were very much impressed by the whole situation. In fact, one of them stood up and said, "This is not. It's anti
Christian nationalism.
Anti-Christian.
It's against Christian nationalism."
Yeah.
But the Bonhoeffer Institute in Europe had not seen the film. So they really were upset about the marketing. And we were opposed to the marketing, but we only have final say on the film. When you turn it over to a distributor, they do the marketing. So they do the poster, and we told them this is not, please don't put a gun in his hand, but they did.
Yeah.
That was the first thing that made so the actors, we know all the actors, they love the film, they know what's in the film. They were very upset about the marketing. So that's what they stood against. They never stood against the actual film. Now, the other thing that happened is people, because we said we were inspired by the Eric Metaxas book, people felt this was sort of an Eric Metaxas film. And that's where the Christian nationalism came out. But they hadn't really seen, this is all happening in Europe, and the film hadn't opened in Europe yet. So now we're really looking forward to our German opening. There's going to be some roundtable discussions with the society and the actors, and they're really going to, I hope, it's gotten kind of further away, this criticism, because there's been so much written about what I've just, what Matt and I have just described. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and for being with us this evening and introducing the evening. I'd like to show our
well, it's our pleasure.
claim.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in the next part of our evening, we have three panelists. Dr. Matthew Kruger. He is professor of the practice at the Theology Department of Boston College, where he teaches philosophy of religion, theology and technology, and also dabbles in religion and popular culture. He is an Episcopal priest of the Diocese of Massachusetts. Jane Carroll Redmond is a retreat leader, pastoral minister, spiritual director, and theologian, who serves as co-chair of the Bishop's Office of Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs in the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. And on Zoom, we have Metropolitan Savas, who is Metropolitan of Pittsburgh in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. He has an active ministry in social media, engaging issues of contemporary culture and society. He's also taught courses on religion and popular culture in Orthodox seminaries. Your Eminence, welcome. Jane's going to talk a little bit about Bonhoeffer's engagement with the Black Church. That was a very important part of the film. And should we show the segment first, or do you want to talk? I think it'd be nice to show the segment.
Show the segment?
If you had all your strength and the Lord is always here, and you have to get along with your friend, just remember His word. How fix will take your burden to the Lord. Leave it there.
And that's why Pinocchio is the greatest fictional character ever created.
Excuse me, Mr. Beebe.
Yes?
Mama said this is supposed to be Sunday school.
Oh, This is Sunday school. Just more school on Sunday. And every day is a day to learn.
I already know what that story means. Don't lie, or your nose will grow like a snake made out of wood.
Not a snake made out of wood. The lesson is, if you want to be a real boy, it's a lot harder than being a puppet.
Henry's exactly right. It's difficult to be a real boy. To tell the truth, to love, to have compassion for others. That's what makes you fully human. But if you live by love, then you don't want to lie. You want to be real. And your strings get cut.
And you don't get a snake made out of wood as a nose either.
Yes, that's a side benefit.
We sneaking out early to go hear the choir again?
Call your souls away. Sliding all around. You shall wear a golden crown.
Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to be with you all and to speak with you all. I want to talk first about Bonhoeffer's Harlem experience and involvement. But my other presentation, which will be on spiritual formation at the illegal seminary in Finkenwalde, could be under the same title as this. My concern this evening is speaking of Christ, community, and resistance, and their relationship to one another. I appreciate the fact that the movie pays attention to Bonhoeffer's experience in Harlem and to some of its influence on him. But it leaves out a couple of crucial aspects of this experience. I choose to call them community and resistance. So I want to talk about them a little bit. And in so doing, I'd like to fill out or complement, supplement your vision beyond the movie of what the experience in Harlem, particularly at Abyssinian Baptist Church, meant to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Community. Bonhoeffer was a man of the church. He was a follower of Christ. We know that. But he was all his life preoccupied with Christ as community, Christ in community, and community itself. What is the nature and the shape and the mission and the vocation of the Christian church? So the lessons of Harlem for him were not just lessons of not being a heady German theologian versus learning how to be a person who has a faith that is heartfelt and bodily. Those are good things, and those are shown in the movie. But the movie shows not only shows overt forms of racial discrimination and the enthusiastic worship characteristic of the Black church, but there's more. The pastor and the people of Abyssinian Baptist Church were deeply, deeply involved in social, economic, and racial justice work. This was part and parcel of their faith. So to show only heartfelt worship is only part of the picture. The pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church at the time was the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr., father of the next pastor, who was also a congressional representative, so both a religious and a political leader, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. He's shown as a preacher and counselor and religious leader, but he was far more than that. And to understand that, one has to go back to the early days of African American existence on these shores and to the invisible institution, which is a nickname one of the historians has given to the Black church, which was everything. It was a place to be in touch with God. It was a place to live community and hold on to each other. It was also a place to plot escape when that was possible. And long story, very, very short. I'm oversimplifying a bit here. Black church and black churches evolved into centers that have been religious and spiritual, cultural with music and art, and political. And Abyssinian Baptist Church was in that tradition. There are some inaccuracies about music and how it was presented that I can speak about more later. But one thing I want to say about that, and you can ask me more later on, is that Bonhoeffer's love was mostly not for jazz and for gospel music, but for the spirituals. The spirituals come out of the experience of slavery. They are anonymous, they are collective. When they say I, they mean we. And they actually have a much more sophisticated theology in them than many think, at least in the white community. Why is this distinction important? First of all, because it's always important to get it right. The spirituals came out of the experience of enslavement, and they are still today classics. That is, works of art and of spirituality that apply and speak to many social and historical situations. I make the distinction also in lifting up spirituals and saying they're not the same thing as gospel music, they're not the same thing as jazz, although they have common sources, because part of Bonhoeffer's education about life in Harlem was not just about the way in which many people in the church were involved in the earliest civil rights movement, before the one that we know more about, but also in something that came to be known fairly fast as the Harlem Renaissance. In other words, he learned about suffering and injustice and discrimination, but he also learned about Black cultural creativity and flourishing in a period of time, 1930, that was really the height of the Harlem Renaissance. And that means that there was a flourishing of music, art, poetry, literature, philosophy, and Bonhoeffer didn't just become active, which he did, in the Abyssinian Baptist Church, and enliven his relationship with Jesus Christ, but he also learned about the literature of the Harlem Renaissance. He read W.E.B. Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folks. He read the work of the poets. He went to Washington at the time that Alain Locke, the great African-American philosopher, was there. And the spirituals are part of the legacy of Black religion, Black spirituality, Black music, Black resistance. And he brought not only the music and spirituality back to Germany, but his knowledge of Black culture as a culture that needed to be appreciated for itself and as an evidence of protest, but also beauty and flourishing. I commend to you, in closing, I could say a lot more, but I promise not to, Professor Reggie Williams' book, Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus. Professor Williams teaches at St. Louis University, and the book is a look at Bonhoeffer's experience in Harlem in relation to the social justice work of churches, the understanding of Jesus Christ as suffering with as well as leading the church, the people of the church, and the interaction between and among the church and the great cultural flourishing of the Harlem Renaissance. Professor Williams also collaborated on a recent documentary. It's not super professional, but it's good. It's called The Cloud of Witnesses, Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Harlem, 1930-31. So this is just a taste of the Harlem story. It's not at all exhaustive, but I hope that it gives you the desire not only to explore Bonhoeffer's experience in Harlem and its influence on him, when he was confronted with anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic violence and government when he came back to Germany. And also that it will remind you that the Harlem Renaissance and the music and philosophy and visual art in the Black community are great American cultural productions as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane. So yes, so then he goes back to Germany, and it's almost no wonder that he's frustrated with theology, frustrated with the church. We'll watch our second segment, and then Matt, you'll speak to that.
The sun, for it's in my sweetie smile. Just to think that I am the lucky one who will lead her down the aisle. Oh, each night I pray that nobody takes her heart away. I can't wait until that happy day when I marry sweet Lorraine. It's all right to clap now.
That music is...
It's called jazz, and it reinvents your ears with every note.
I'm glad you're home, brother. Germany was empty without you.
Can you tell us one more thing before I go up? One thing we couldn't imagine about America.
All right. It's this. In the German church, I was headed into the dead end of religion. Father, did you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't want to pursue theology any longer.
Thank God. Such a fine mind was always too good for the church.
In Harlem, I finally saw real faith instead of dead religion. And now I plan on teaching the German church all about it.
Wait, the church? But you just said you were done with religion.
I am, as should be the church.
I like that, son. You're still cocky. Trying to teach the church? They sure could use some damn instructions at the moment.
Carl.
So thank you all for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about Bonhoeffer. I'd like to open up with a little quote. This is from scholar Peter Frick, and he writes, "The element that is missing in the two typical portrayals of Bonhoeffer as a spiritual mentor and martyr is that he was more than anything else an academic theologian." Maybe, probably. I think Bonhoeffer is a multi-hyphenate person, right? Somebody who's not reducible to one thing. But when he says, I don't want to do theology anymore, I thought, let's qualify precisely what he means there, because there's a very big qualification, right? He goes on to write maybe a dozen more books in his short life. He dies at 39, and there's 16 volumes in this Dietrich Bonhoeffer works. So what is he doing with his time? He's writing. And he's writing extremely technical theology, in addition to pastoral work, in addition to spirituality. But his academic theology is very difficult to read, very precise, engaged in a very specific interaction with other German theologians. So when he says, I don't want to do theology anymore, maybe you're hearing, oh, well, there's something better that I should be doing. I should be doing just going to church. I should just be doing social activism. This is not what he means. He is rejecting a specific German tradition of doing theology in an abstract way, in a way that separates from life. And so the challenge of his saying, I don't want to do theology anymore, is to say, well, how can we do theology in a way that actually brings Christ into life, that gives life to the church, that gives a practical import to these abstract and technical distinctions we're making. He does, to be fair to the movie, he does have very strong critiques of religion, right? He wants to and promotes a religionless Christianity, or a Christianity without religion. And again, this sounds like, what are we doing? He's responding to a very specific track, again, in German theology that had this notion of religion as, God is this distant figure, we are in this relationship and interchange, and spirituality is the primary zone or reality of our Christian lives. The problem with this is that it sets up spheres, right? It sets up spheres of practice where we say, well, this is the church sphere, this is the spirituality sphere, this is the political sphere, this is the social justice sphere, instead of having an actual integrated form. And so if we can get out of that by having a religionless Christianity, let's get into that, because that would be a more authentic Christian way of living. So again, his terms are very specific. I don't expect the movie to include footnotes where it explains all the details of this. That's for the rest of the scholars to figure out. But it struck me as something that needed qualification.
Thank you very much. Well, that leads us really to the crux of the matter, the crux of his legacy and his life, the crux, which is crux, the cross in Latin. And we'll ask Metropolitan Savas to talk to this. What does it mean to follow Christ? They're the questions that Bonhoeffer is asking, and that's the content of his most famous book, The Cost of Discipleship, that was published in 1937. So we'll watch one more segment and then turn to His Eminence.
Will you follow me? Will you follow him? All the way to the cross.
All the way to the cross, right, Dietrich?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Only problem, your cross isn't in America yet. It's in Germany. I, too, remember understanding what I was preaching only the moment the words left my mouth.
Reverend, I'm not running away, I'm running towards.
That's fair enough. Towards what? Where? Where is your finish line?
Your Eminence.
There's so much I wanted to contribute and to say. I feel very strongly about the person and the teaching of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I wanted, first of all, to say, Father John, that I echo your own remarks about having felt like you met him a long time ago, and that when you met him in the 70s, or which is about the same time, we're the same age, that he seemed like a lifetime ago, as it were. But now he seems so much more immediate. His hour has come, as it were. But and I also want to say that I concur with the producers who spoke earlier that they weren't well serviced by their marketing. That somehow the word got out that this was a different kind of film than it actually was. It is a very good movie. It's not, one can criticize it from a number of perspectives, and one of them the perspective of historicity. You know, it's almost, but I criticize the Dylan movie on the same grounds. But, you know, you have to conflate certain events and play a little with time sequence in order to emphasize certain dramatic points. So I don't think that the movie suffers for that. If you want to know how close where the actual historical failings are, I would suggest you can easily enough do that by asking Google. But I want to respond. You asked me to speak to a very particular passage when he is rehearsing his remarks there at Union, and he says that when Christ calls a man, he calls him to die. And that comes off as strange or extreme. And of course it does. But in a sense, it's what I wonder why it should. I mean, he really is simply saying emphatically what Christ himself says in the gospel. He's just forefronting the cost of discipleship, as you know, to point to one of his greatest books, that the cost of discipleship is that to follow Christ is not an easy thing. And that's his argument with the church, is that the church has ritualized the message, or made the message seem as if it can be lived by means of particular ritual behaviors or social attitudes or whatever, but that Christ, as the movie says frequently, would be opposed to the church. And here, when I say the church, I hope Orthodox Christians aren't, it wouldn't be a bad idea to reflect on the ways that the current Orthodox Church falls short of the fullness of the gospel in its interaction with the world. But he's speaking very specifically to the complicated situation of the national church in Germany. And a movie of this size can't deal with the complexities of his character and the depth of his theology and the complexities of the church-state relationship as it existed there in pre-war Germany. But he wanted, in fact, it's interesting that when he came to theology, he was not from a very churchy family. His family they weren't regular churchgoers. His father was a professor of psychiatry in Berlin, I believe, and a very prominent and not what you would call a believer, but. And they were surprised that he chose to go into theology. And in fact, I've heard it said that he completed his doctoral thesis in theology without really going to church, because he didn't really, he was of the mindset that this is about, the faith is about a relationship with God and not with others. Well, he came to think otherwise. And again, in one of his more important books, Life Together, when he realizes that the truth of Christ is a relational truth. And it makes demands on me in relation to my brother. So, but I've said a lot, and I know there's more clips to go to, so maybe on the second round, I'll say what else I have to say.
The basic teaching of Christ is what it's about. And we're in a seminary setting here. And the next clip that I want to play that Jane will speak to is about the seminary, the illegal seminary, the underground seminary, and spiritual formation.
You have been called for such a time as this, Dietrich. Look, this is the new Nazi Bible. Take a look. Jesus is now an Aryan. And the 10 Commandments have become 12.
honor your Führer and master, keep the blood pure, and your honor. This is the definition of unholy.
Dietrich, I'm expected on my pulpit in Dahlem every Sunday. I can't hide. Or they will start looking for me and discover all of this.
I'm a young man myself. What could I possibly teach these students?
Teach them your heart.
My heart?
Yes.
I love footnotes. I have an academic background. I'm appreciating how we bring different perspectives to this conversation. I think it's true of all famous or semi-famous historical figures that they also function a bit like Rorschach tests. So we each bring our lens to them. There's an archival photo that I thought of while His Eminence was speaking about the German church that is absolutely chilling, and I've used it in teaching and in retreats. It's the main leading minister and pastors of the German church, die Deutsche Christen, the German Christians, they call themselves, making in full regalia of preaching robe, making the Nazi salute. It is an absolutely chilling photo, and it comes to mind because what I want to talk about, I hope briefly, is spiritual formation for a time of crisis, more than crisis, for a dangerous time, for a violent time, for a time of dictatorship. And it's particularly significant, I think, for us these days to examine this because we are living in a dangerous time in this country, and the rest of the world is not feeling so safe either, nor is it. And we're in an institution of theological education. So what did Bonhoeffer, in fact, do at Finkenwalde, at the underground seminary? He did plenty of academic teaching. He did not just give people his heart, although his heart was very much part of it. Bonhoeffer, first of all, was well-traveled by the time he got to Finkenwalde. He had visited Rome with his brother as a teenager, so he'd been exposed to the sea of Catholicism, S-E-E. He had been to Barcelona, where he had served as a curate in a German-speaking church. He had been to New York and back the first time in 1930-31. And he'd been to England, where he also served a church, got to know the Church of England and the Anglican tradition, and became friends with an English bishop with whom he would be friends for his lifetime. So this opened his mind, and he was very much a Lutheran Christian. There's plenty in their writing, as Matt can tell, in his writing, as Matt can tell us, about the cross, about grace, about the insufficiency of human beings and their sin. But the way that he led the seminary in Finkenwalde was an ecumenical way, because he'd been exposed not only to his academic background and to his pastoral experience, but to other ways of being Christian. So let me just talk about a few spiritual disciplines, and then you can ask me or us further later. The book, The Cost of Discipleship, came out of this seminary experience. So did Life Together. Astoundingly, Life Together was written in about 4 weeks. Talk about pressure. And his focus was, how does community help us to follow Christ? And how does Christ, who needs to become incarnate in the world, who is already incarnate, but who needs to become incarnate through us, through the way we live together, not just as individuals, and through the way we live as in a dangerous time, this requires leading life together, and it requires particular spiritual disciplines. And let me name 3 of them. One is, and I've taught this and spoken about this and shared this with people in more churchy sorts of settings. Bonhoeffer, very much a Lutheran, very much a Protestant, very much a Christian, believed that the best thing to do is to hear or read the Word of God first thing in the morning. Don't let anything else get in your ears or your heart. Now, I'm speaking about Lent is coming in all our traditions here. Think about when you get up in the morning, you check your phone right away, right? I think a lot of us would like to think that we pray the Psalms right away or we pray the morning office, and maybe we do, but it's really tempting to check that phone and to check the email. So Bonhoeffer has lessons for today because he was very strong about that in his writing. The first sound, the first word in your morning must be the Word of God. So he had all kinds of disciplines, such as you would expect in a seminary of any branch of the Christian church, regular organized prayer. But the second spiritual discipline I want to mention is that Bonhoeffer, because he had been exposed to monastic traditions in the Anglican tradition and elsewhere, was very big on silent meditation. This did not go over well with the young seminarians. It was a little too Roman, and it was also not what they were used to. He required communal prayer, but he also required that the seminarians have a discipline of silent meditation and prayer. It was a very important part of their training, along with a balanced life with meals and trips and music. The third thing I want to say is part of the scripture. I want to say a brief word about the Psalms. This book, and you're welcome to come look at the books later on, has Life Together and the Prayer Book of the Bible, which is Bonhoeffer's little book on the Psalms, in one volume. Bonhoeffer's approach to the Psalms is Christocentric and Christological. We would call him a supersessionist these days, in that he did believe that the new covenant supersedes the old one. But he also knew and believed that the Psalms were the prayer of Jesus, who was born and lived and died a religious Jew. And as you saw in the movie, the Nazis and the theologians and pastors who were in line with them basically were seeking to get rid of the Hebrew Bible and of the Jewishness of Jesus. And so when you read Bonhoeffer's book on the Psalms, you think, oh, lovely book on the Psalms, brings up how the Psalms are related to Jesus and it's important to pray them. That was a radical gesture in the 1940s because, remember the old heresy of Marcionism, right? Anybody remember about Marcion? So Marcion was somebody who was declared a heretic pretty soon, who only wanted to include in the Holy Scriptures and the Word of God what we now call the New Testament, the Christian Scriptures. And Bonhoeffer said, this is what the Nazis are doing. And he very strongly believed, particularly in praying the Psalms, but not exclusively, that the Word of God needs to be present and important in its fullness. And the Psalms with both testaments, both witnesses. So his love for the Psalms and his praying the Psalms and his inviting his students and us to pray the Psalms is part of Bonhoeffer's whole vision of what it means to hear the Word, to follow the Word, to be persons of the Word. I think I'll stop here. There were other practices like confession, which was unusual for his setting, and practices of the Lord's Supper. But the 3 that I mentioned, I think were the ones that I would love you to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Well, there's silence that is good, and there's silence that is not so good. one of my pet peeves is how Christians like to keep their hands clean. The segment that Matt chose is coming up now, and that's what we'll be hearing.
The Nazis plan to imprison or frontline every pastor that won't bow the knee to Hitler.
Yeah, tell me there's something we can do.
There is. Dietrich, I need you to understand that your life will not be the same after I speak these words, even if you don't join us.
Yes, speak.
This is not like when the resistance met in your house and you offered theology instead of action.
You Christians only know how to keep your hands clean. I hated hearing it then, and I hate remembering it now.
This will take dirty hands.
That's all I have left to offer.
Gentlemen, we have devised a plot to assassinate the Führer.
Hans, you're talking to pastors, not killers. Dietrich, tell him.
Here I am, Hans. Send me.
Dietrich, you're an avowed pacifist.
And David was a shepherd when he slew Goliath.
The will of God is that men should defeat their enemies by loving them.
Who wrote that empty promise?
I did. And I was right. Before Hitler.
Is Hitler the first evil ruler since scripture was written?
No. But he's the first one I can stop.
It's a wonderfully difficult scene right there. The question immediately arises, if you imagine yourself, you may not have to try very hard in a country where justice is at risk. How do you respond? In the rest of my academic work, I do a lot of work in philosophy and philosophy of religion, and two of the figures I study are Martin Heidegger and Nishida Kitaro, who's a Japanese Zen Buddhist. And Heidegger very famously became a Nazi in 1933 for a time, and then left, so to speak, but never really apologized. So his strategy was to join and keep his head down that way for a time. Nishida takes a similar tack and aligns himself cautiously, critically, with the Japanese fascist government of the time. This makes it really difficult to study them. Couldn't they have done better? The counterpoint is, where does Bonhoeffer end up? And there's two things to say about that. One is he ends up dead, that it cost him his life. And that's a high price to pay. And I think that is part of what Heidegger and Nishida are thinking too. What is the cost of my objection is my life. That's a steep thing to require of everyone to give up, and what Jesus asks of us, but it's a steep thing to require. The second point of this is something they kind of toe around in here. A key thing is we don't know what exactly Bonhoeffer's role actually was in this. There's good evidence that he had some sort of awareness of something going on, but any direct role in any assassination plot is unknown. He's probably aware of it. The second part is he says dirty hands, and we should take that quite literally, that when he is thinking of this action, he thinks it's morally wrong. It is not justifiable in his mind, in his theology, to attempt to assassinate Hitler. And yet, and you can go into the complexities of his ethics for how this actually works. Shout out to people who know Kierkegaard, kind of like a teleological suspension of the ethical. There's a way in which he's saying, this is wrong. My job as a Christian is to love and to convert through love, and yet I can see no justification for that behavior in the moment, and yet I can see no justification for my choice to assassinate Hitler being the right moment, the right thing to pursue. I don't know. I don't know what to do. That's the crisis. Where will I go from here? Well, he goes to the cross. He persists. He does what he thinks God could forgive him for. But I think that's a crucial part of understanding our context right now. Bonhoeffer has been co-opted kind of selectively by Christian nationalists in a triumphalist vein, as if there is just this kind of righteousness, implicit or otherwise, to the choices that he's making. Bonhoeffer never feels right about the violence that he's pursuing, if he ever does. There's a concern there that persists. Dirty hands are what we conclude. On this note, I think there's a lot of writing on whether, what does Bonhoeffer mean when he says he's a pacifist, and does it mean pacifism? And you can go into the academic qualifications, but I do like what Michael de Jonge concludes. No morally clean choice is available. It's very Lutheran. It's a wonderful challenge to dwell on. I'll end there.
Thank you very much. And we'll delve a little bit further into this as well, because I think it is what the heart of the movie is about. I think it is what the heart of Bonhoeffer's life is about. With the last segment that Metropolitan Savas has chosen and will speak to.
What good is the church if it doesn't speak for the victims of the state, for those who have no voice? The Jews.
The Jews?
We cannot stand by while the Jews are being persecuted.
You bring us a problem of which there is no proof. How do we know that this is simply not Jewish propaganda?
I have seen the yellow stars, the violence in the streets. Hitler has carved them out of society, left them stateless, unprotected. So look me in the eye and call me propaganda. I have secreted myself here to tell you that the true German church has no alternative but to break away from the false church of the Nazis, their Reichskirche. We need to let the world know what the Nazis are doing to the Jews. And if the church does not speak now, we will lose our voice for 100 years.
This is a German problem, not an international one.
Hitler took Germany and her church without firing a single bullet. How many would he have to fire at you?
But you speak of bullets when you should be planning diplomacy.
The church's job is to kindle peace, peacefully.
Oh, you mean silently?
If need be.
Our silence, in the face of evil, is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act.
This is the crux of the movie, and this is what is the greatest challenge, because it's inevitable that Christian leaders will see in our current situation things that need to be addressed and themes that need to be articulated. And we are in a very unprecedented moment when images that have been historically associated with the other side, Antichrist, are being toyed with, as if to say, how far can we go in using this kind of imagery before you call me on it, before anybody has the courage to say, this is wrong. This is beyond, you can't play with this. This is fire. Well, in the case of, you hear all sorts of equivocations on the part of the very serious and committed Christian leaders there in England. This scene takes place in London, and this is that side of him that is supposed to represent his activity as a spy, which is not very carefully delineated in the movie. I mean, he really is going to witness to what's the reality on the ground, which isn't the international media and the world church is not taking it seriously enough. It's not hearing it loudly and clearly enough. So he's bearing witness to the horrific atrocity of the separation of the church by fiat from its Jewish roots. And it's demonstrated in the movie in the actual scriptures of the Reich are simply New Testament scriptures that are scrubbed of any reference to Judaism in terms of its relationship to Jesus as a person. So it's and as you heard Jane mention just a little earlier, how deeply invested in the prayers of the Jewish people in the Psalms and in the historical experience of the Jews Bonhoeffer was. So it was an atrocity that I think from our perspective, it seems like an easy one. And you can say, you look at the scenes in the movie and you wonder why people weren't courageous enough early enough. But you can also see how easy it is to let things slide. As I don't remember the bishop's name, is it Mueller? With his famous remark delivered in a sermon in the movie, you know, when they came for the socialists, I didn't say anything because I'm not a socialist. They came for the communists. I didn't do anything because I'm not a communist. They came for, and they came for me. And who's left to say anything on my behalf? I didn't see myself. I wasn't connected to anybody else. So why should anybody be concerned about my fate? So, the fact that not speaking is a form of speaking is a very heavy charge, you know. That there, I'm reminded of a line in a poem by a German-speaking poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, at the end of his poem "Archaic Torso of Apollo." On meditating on a work of ancient art, a headless and armless stump of Apollo in a museum, he has a revelation, an epiphany, that somehow mysteriously comes to, there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life. And the enormity of that there is, you're not outside. You're at the center of your story. And what you say and what you don't say has eternal weight. You know, you are responsible for every moment. And so, as I said, I feel very convicted by that scene. I know that I feel I often find myself on the side of the clerics in England, finding excuses for not saying what needs to be said. And I hope I can find the courage in the days to come, to say what needs to be said in a timely manner. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Eminence. So we have a little bit of time for some questions.
As Orthodox Christians, part of a very small church that thinks very highly of itself. And one of the things that we are looking at right now in the United States is essentially the utter silence of the Orthodox bishops, with, I have to say, the exception of His Eminence, who is quite vocal online, in the face of what is going on. And even to the point where there was very vocal negative reaction to the famous sermon of Bishop Marian Budd that manifested itself in the forms of, this is not something that a pastor or a priest should speak of from the pulpit. This is a scandal, and Orthodoxy is the one church that speaks of God. And the question that I have, and the challenge that, with apologies to the present hierarchs, I always have for our bishops, is what are we then if we do not speak for the victims? What is our excuse?
Matt, Jane?
I am grateful every day not to be a bishop, is the ways I would start. The difficulties of navigating all these, the pools that so many bishops, the bishop I know, always think of themselves as pastors, first and foremost, charged with tending of their flock, and to push the shepherd metaphor, if you're yelling at your sheep that they're wrong, it can sometimes feel like you're just pushing them away and not taking care of them. That's right. I really appreciated it, His Eminence's call to action, to courage, right? It is a hard thing. I'll mention as well, one of the things that Bonhoeffer talks about in Life Together is the idea that to be a community does not mean that everybody likes each other. To be in community means being open to conflict and dissent, and to realizing that we can be together, we will be together most authentically only if we are open about our call to moral growth. So I think if we could have that as our baseline, then maybe we would be more comfortable doing this. But I do appreciate the challenge of being courageous.
Jane?
I don't have very much to add to what you said, and I certainly cannot speak for the hierarchs of a church other than my own. I can express my appreciation to Bishop Buddy. She certainly was, as I heard, quoting the gospel in a very simple and direct way, and a way that had a lot of humility to it. But more to your point, it's not just the job of hierarchs, although a tough job as it is, although it is necessary, I think, and will become more necessary for bishops to take a stand. But we need to be convicted by those words and by that impulse and by that call of His Eminence in our own lives. What are we doing in our little way? What if in our very families there are people who voted differently, who feel differently about recent immigrants? There are a lot of things that we struggle with right at the grassroots in our congregations, in our families, in our friendship. And one of the most difficult things, and we talk about it in the Episcopal Church, we don't resolve it at all, I think, but people are feeling the pain of it, is how terribly polarized our society is. Sometimes this also goes deep into the church as well, and how the very task of listening to each other and speaking to each other and staying with the listening and the speaking and not leaving as soon as things get tough is terribly difficult. I don't have a pathway or an answer. And one of the most moving things in Life Together is, I think, as you said, when Bonhoeffer talks about the fact that we're called to love one another, and we don't really have to like each other, but we do have to live together. And that's following the gospel, is doing that. I'm not sure if we addressed your question, but thank you very much for that challenge, and also for expressing what you see and believe.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Father Robert.
Last week, Susan and I passed by Union Seminary, so I'm wondering, did Bonhoeffer receive any support or encouragement from the Union community regarding his activism within the black community and black church?
Good question. Yes.
Yes and no. The social gospel movement, that strand of ethics and action within Protestantism was very big at Union, and the legacies of it remain. Bonhoeffer was, well, he stood out at Union because he was a German with 2 doctorates, so he wasn't he was still very young, he was 25, but he wasn't a student getting a master's. There were African-American students at Union. There was not terribly deep involvement with the black community that I know of. Bonhoeffer certainly was one among few who really immersed himself in an African-American church community. That was quite unusual. He first went to Abyssinian Baptist Church, though, on what we would call a field trip. It was kind of see the sights of Harlem and the black community. And they were important sites, but it was a kind of tour. It's a place to start, but it's not what he was fully satisfied with. He went deeper. And I want to add to the scene with the children that Bonhoeffer taught Sunday school often with his friend Al France. He's spoken of in some books as Frank and others as Al, but his last name was Fisher. And he was Bonhoeffer's good African-American friend. But Bonhoeffer also did Bible study with a group of church women. And these were African-American women at the beginning of the Great Depression who had lived with and were still living through the Jim Crow era. And it is certain that Bonhoeffer learned from them and from being with them. One of my mottos is never underestimate the church ladies. And that is very, very true in the black church. And Bonhoeffer learned some lessons there from the children, from the pastor, but also from the women with whom he read the Bible.
Did you want to add anything, Matt? We have time for one more question. Yes.
Hi. What this is bringing up for me is that what does it mean to carry a cross in the present moment as an individual and joining together with all the other people that want to pick up a cross? Because I was privileged to be with Martin Luther King in his hearing him speak, marching with him, and also in the anti-Vietnam War protests. And I'm older now, it's 50 years later or more, and I'm asking myself this question. What does it mean for me now in light of the identified enemies, which I would call them the new Jews, okay, which are the immigrants, the poor, and anybody who's sexually different than anyone else, put them all together and then lump them all as Jews. I'm not putting down Jews. It has nothing to do with that. I'm talking about how they're seen. And so when I was watching the ministers and all that, chat with each other, and my family they're all ministers, so I grew up with all of them. And at what point do you just say, stop talking? Now we need to just, what does it mean to carry my cross? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? What does it mean today? What does it mean in this moment? What does it mean next week? Or are we just going to be, talking and talking and talking and talking, reflecting, and then we don't really carry a cross? Because it's too freaking messy to carry a cross and too dangerous.
A brief answer, so we can have one more question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay? A good question, and actually you leave us with a challenge, because we need to ask that question with each other in small groups of Christians that are conversation-sized, And we all need to do that and to reflect on that question when we leave this place and in the coming weeks. I'm being preachy and pastoral here, but I think it's a very important question. It will take different forms for each of us, and we cannot possibly do it alone. We can't possibly do it alone. We have to do it as a Christian community, as the body of Christ, including in small groups where we can speak to each other and listen to each other and challenge each other.
Last brief question.
I'll be as brief as I can, but this is a 10-year question. I was in Germany, and Bonhoeffer brought me to Germany, and then to Orthodoxy. And when I was in Germany, I expected a repentant place, and it wasn't quite that. There was shame still coming. The students would tell me they didn't bring a flag out to a football game until a few years ago. My question in that was, there was still suffering and shame in Germany after that, and I put it inside and I asked myself, after Bonhoeffer happens and after a trigger is pulled and the injustice is taken care of, whatever that is, what is the response, the Christian response after that, to the injustice after the injustice?
Just kind of covering both of your questions, I was thinking of Kierkegaard again, and in his book, The Present Age, he uses this metaphor, and the present age is really this critique of society that he sees as leveled, where everything has become equally significant, and so nobody does anything risky. And he talks about this story that there's this great treasure on this icy lake, and everybody talks about how it would be great to have that, but nobody is willing to go out on the ice and get it, because could it really be so great? Could it really be so important that we would need to risk it to go out there? And so what we see in Bonhoeffer is this kind of peak moment where it's the culmination, right? This is a clear evil instance, and we respond to it. The problem is that once that is not so clear, it doesn't mean our role has changed at all, right? If we are not going out on the ice, no matter the situation, no matter if it's comfortable and the society seems peaceful and passive, then we're failing to respond to the call of God. That God is calling us out of ourselves to this risk-taking position, to be pushed and challenged. And so after Bonhoeffer is gone, after the crisis is gone, it will come again. But even in that meantime, we risk this kind of complacency and comfort that we say, I don't need to do this extreme behavior. I don't need to risk myself. The truth is we always do, I think, which is the hard part of this. It'll take many forms, but we always need to risk ourselves.
Thank you. So let me try and wrap up here. We heard from the very beginning of the evening that the criticism that's leveled against the film and certainly against the book is Christian nationalism or German nationalism or pure blood nationalism or white nationalism. I do think that this is a problem today still in our country. And so each of the panelists chose 2 segments to speak to. I want to close with 2 segments, which I will not speak to, which I want to leave you with this evening. And hopefully you'll see just how eerily applicable, how eerily appropriate these segments are to what is happening in the United States today. Before we show the 2 segments, because we'll close immediately afterwards, I do want to thank the producers that joined us by Zoom, the panelists for their generosity and their preparation and their time, you, the audience. I'm also grateful to everyone involved in the organizing here and to our hosts, the Meliodas Center.
The Nazis' rise to power has everyone a little anxious, Dietrich.
The Nazis? They only got, what was it, 18% in 30? And that was a mirage.
Well, this year's mirage will double that.
I don't believe it.
It's because you were away while Hitler used the Versailles Treaty like his personal weapon. Every bad thing that ever happened in Germany landed on the doorsteps of the Jews and the communists, and there were enough working people begging for bread to believe it.
There's no chance that this loudmouth from Austria will have fooled enough Germans by then.
But Hitler only has to fool the Germans who come out to vote.
But he's still only one man. If he does somehow manage to sneak in, we'll vote him out next time. Just like we did with Ebert and Simons.
See, your mother still believes in the wisdom of people. Unfortunately, that's how tyrants win.
So now it's my fault that Hitler will become chancellor.
Things have changed, Paula. The country has grown angrier, and people are falling prey to Hitler's nationalism and paranoia.
And the Nazis feed off that. They've been systematic, fighting for every local election, each tiny hamlet, prying the country from our hands while few were even watching. And the church, no doubt, bears some blame.
Oh, yeah. Hitler and his new Bishop Müller now call it the Reichskirche, the Church of the Third Reich.
One man cannot change the name of the whole church.
He already has, Dietrich.
I've heard via my office that the Nazis plan to identify and dispose of people with mental disabilities.
Father, that can't be true.
You speak in nightmares. Surely rumor and rage cannot win the day.
Unless the day is already lost.
Finally, my friends, we know who we are. How long have we waited for this moment when we can finally hear Germany's heart beat again? At last, we have read the writing on the walls of this country's soul. And the words are Chancellor Adolf Hitler. God sent Germany a prophet. And more than that, a true savior.
Speak of any savior but Christ on the pulpit. Blessed him.
Dietrich, everything new needs a moment to settle.
We're in God's house, and the bishop is celebrating a man. I don't need time to let it settle.
So that we can solve the great challenges facing our people. To combine our shared power so that we can achieve this together.
All right, you don't support Hitler, many don't, but that doesn't mean that you can make a distraction.
They are building an idol to Hitler inside those walls in real time.
You're exaggerating, Dietrich. You've been away quite a while this man has been building...
Building what? An army of clergy blinded by... I don't even know what. This man is without charm, without character, charisma.
He has captured the nation's imagination, Dietrich. And our churches are fuller than they've been in years.
But it's not about how many, Bishop. It's about who. Don't you realize handing a man this kind of crown will come with a terrible price?
I can't agree.
Both for us and those he's so aggressively targeting, the Jews.
Yeah, surely Herr Hitler will resolve the Jewish question too.
Why must there even be a Jewish question? This is our national cathedral.
Dietrich, it has long been our policy that politics and the church should not intersect.
Listen to that applause. They already have.